they have it lifted, and before they can start descending, the first thing they see is one of these huge lead coffins weighing the best part of a ton is 3/4 of the way up the steps as if it was trying to get out.
Yeah.
That was too much even for Combermere. He said, right, that's it, guys. They went down, they inspected, there were no marks on the floor, there were no signs of anybody breaking in through one of the coral stone slabs, and Lord Combermere said, right, that's it. He said to the vicar, I would like you to arrange, vicar, for these coffins to be buried separately in single graves anywhere in your churchyard, but well apart. And I want this tomb to remain open by my order as a governor. And to this very day, the Chase Elliott Vault is open. I was talking most recently to a friend of mine who is a funeral director, and I was carrying out a funeral service for him, and he said, by the way, Lionel, you told me about the Chase Elliott Vault at Christchurch. I said, yeah. He said, well, I've just had a holiday in Barbados. He said, and I've been down there, and it's still wide open, just like you said it was in your documentary. I said, yeah, that was Combermere's order from over 200 years ago. And so there it was. There was a friend who just had a holiday in Barbados and had gone down to see it because he'd heard me tell the story. And he was as impressed as we were. He said, I said to him, what did you think of it, Bill? And he said it was kind of creepy down there. Well, when a funeral director, mortician, says that a place is kind of creepy.
Yeah. But you believe that there could be a scientific explanation for this, correct?
I do. I do. My problem is that I don't know what it is. I've thought of numerous things. One is floodwater, and one of the researchers a few years ago actually made a facsimile of a lead coffin of the same size and weight, and filled it with animal carcass to the weight of a human body, and tried it to see if it would float. And it did, like an iceberg, only the top little piece came up, but the thing would float. The problem against that is, how on earth could water have got in there when it's a good 150 feet above sea level, and it's so close to the church door that if there'd been any kind of flooding that was serious enough to get those coffins up, it would have been noticed, and somebody said, oh, well, that's what's done it. It's the flood water.
Yeah.
And again, I would have thought that would have moved the wooden coffin, but it didn't. And another thought, another possibility, if we, as it were, discount a floodwater theory, is the possibility that still unknown to our technology, even in the 21st century, even unknown to the best of our metallurgists, is it possible that there is some force, like magnetism, on ferrous and nickel-based metals, iron, steel, and so on, which works on lead, which is impervious to the magnetism as we understand it that's around today. So are we looking for a mysterious force that's perhaps in the rock, perhaps in the geological structure in that area, which is able to disturb lead objects? And yet, if it is a natural force of that kind, then it doesn't seem to be a static one, because if there was just a simple static force operating on them, it might pull them sideways to one side of the vault if that was where the attraction was coming from, or the repulsion. But the thing must be a variable force. It can't be a simple static force like the ordinary terrestrial magnetic field that moves compasses around.
Yeah.
And what it is, I can't imagine. Then another of the possibilities is highly localized seismic action. In other words, something like a miniature earthquake, which is so localized. Can we just imagine that this vault, about 150 feet above sea level on the slope of the cemetery, and below it, in the sort of geological structure, there's a kind of connection to some force or movement, like tectonic plates that shift and cause most serious earthquakes. Is there something like a kind of localized access to a tectonic plate shift, which would send the equivalent of a miniature earthquake all the way up and shake these coffins and then stop? But how on earth it got a coffin up a flight of steps is totally beyond any science that I'm aware of. Yet I'm sure there's got to be a natural explanation. People who look for paranormal explanations would say, oh yes, well, it could be that somebody felt they'd been wronged, or one of the bodies interred there was suspected of being a suicide, and maybe there was some sort of disturbed spirit involved.
Yeah.
But if we refuse to accept any voodoo explanation or psychic explanation, we are up against what could be the most exciting discovery in a world that needs energy, which is pollution-free. If somebody could find the scientific source of energy which will lift a ton weight up a flight of stairs, we've got something that could offer a solution to the carbon problem.
Yes, exactly. Now, I had two stories that I've wanted to ask you about. I was very curious. I don't know if you covered or know anything about these stories or not.
I'll try.
One of them takes place in Siberia, where a group of scientists had drilled a hole down into the ground.
Yeah.
And this was supposed to be one of the deepest holes ever drilled, and I assume you're familiar with this story.
Right. Tell me a bit more. Give me a bit more background on it, Steve.
There was a scientist named Dr. Azakov. He was a Russian scientist, and they drilled this hole down into the ground. And at a certain point, their drill began to wobble, meaning it had broke through into a free space. And they lowered both temperature monitoring devices and microphones down into this to check and see, trying to record seismic movements or anything like this. And what they brought back up on the recording has the sound of human voices.
Well, this is absolutely wonderful. Now, can I tie it in with the one that you'll know well, which was recorded extremely accurately in a good book a few years ago called The Fire Went By. And this was the sometimes referred to as the Great Siberian Meteorite. And there was an enormous explosion in Siberia. Somewhere, if I've got my dates right, late 19th century. And the trees underneath the focal point of the explosion were all blasted away sideways. And shall we say, the most popular explanation was that this was a meteorite that had become of larger size than usual, that had become intensely hot on its passage through the Earth's atmosphere, and that shortly before impact, the sheer contrast between the heat in the meteorite and the freezing cold of Siberia had caused the thing to explode, and it had flattened trees for hundreds of yards around from that one central point. But, of course, the other thing that would have done that was a nuclear explosion. And the other theory is that this was an extraterrestrial visitor whose craft was in very serious trouble, and he had with the last of his strength and ability, he had steered it away from centers of civilization so it would do minimum damage. And the last thing he looked out on was the bleak expanse of the Siberian plain. And he had let the thing, which had a nuclear engine, he'd let the thing explode there, blowing him to pieces, of course, along with the remains of his spacecraft. So this great Siberian meteorite mystery could, if we go along with the theory that it was extraterrestrial and that it was a visitor with a high degree of technology, what if we link in the story of the very, very deep drilling down into a cavern of some sort, or a huge space under Siberia? You see, these theories about something within the Earth, the human voices coming through on this Russian exploration, tie in with what Jules Verne wrote about Journey to the Center of the Earth. And there are a number of believers in a sort of a hollow Earth theory, in which we don't have to go along with the Jules Verne idea that the whole lot is hollow, but the Earth is so big, and our crust can be up to 40 miles thick. There is ample room in some areas, not for caverns, but for sort of subspaces. When we think about the cooling process of the Earth, and particularly the revolution of the Earth, then the likelihood of caverns appearing as the magma cooled to form crust, if you've got a spinning object, it would seem far more likely that when the consistency of the cooling rock which is being spun differs, then one lot will go on ahead of another, leaving inevitably a vast cavern behind it. Now, how that cavern became inhabited, if there were quite clearly these human voices coming up from the depth when the Russian scientists probed down into it, are we left wondering about whether there have been alien visitors in the past, extraterrestrial visitors, and where better placed to hide from our still limited technology than in deep caverns below the surface? And I said, a cavern is really an inadequate description for a space this size.
That's an angle I hadn't considered, and I do have the recording of these voices that they. This is alleged to be from this site. If you would like to hear it,
I'd love to hear it.
Okay, this is about 30 seconds long, and we're going to play. And folks, if you're listening and you have children around, you might want to plug their ears because it is a bit. It's a bit scary, and I don't want to scare anybody before bedtime. So here is a recording that came from these scientists in Siberia. And the scientists that found it thought perhaps they had basically drilled into hell. But it's a very odd story, and I was hoping that perhaps you had researched it. But if you'd like, I could send you a link to the story.
I would love to go into it in more depth, because listening very carefully and with great interest to that recording, I am reminded immediately of another story that might interest you and our listeners that would link with it. Now, there's a story about the Horsalok cavern on a mountain in Thuringia.